Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. This week on the podcast, I have a very fun conversation with Chappell Ellison. Chappell is currently a content strategist at Huge in Brooklyn, but began her career as a graphic designer and was part of the first class of SVA's design criticism program. She's written about design for various publications and produces a popular weekly roundup on Twitter of design-related articles and objects that she enjoys. Chappell and I have actually been friends on Twitter for years and have had many online conversations about design criticism and writing, but this was actually the first time we met in real life. And in this conversation, we talk about her early love of art and an epiphany that happened at Disneyworld that may or may not have been a dream that made her realize she wanted to be a designer. It's a really good story. We also talk about how she started writing and her experience studying criticism and what it means to be a good critic. This was truly one of the most fun conversations I've had in a while, and I think covers a lot of really interesting ground. I hope that you enjoy it also. Remember, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month, or for the month of December, we're offering yearly memberships for only $40. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that has additional content and episode previews. These memberships really help keep the podcast going. I just appreciate all of your support and hope that you enjoy this great conversation with Chappell Ellison. So is Chappell a family name?
Yes, Chappell's a family name. My dad, who is a master of the art of BS, claims that it is the last name of a captain of a sister ship of the Mayflower. I don't know if I believe him. I looked it up. There is a John Chappell who was aboard one of those ships. It's possible. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, because I don't think I've ever met another Chappell. I don't think I've even ever heard that name before.
It's a surname.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it is now my name. And most people think it's pronounced Chappell, which sounds delightful and fancy. And I'm often correcting them.
You do correct them? You don't just let them go with it?
No, I've thought about it. It depends how intimidating the person is. And I'm just like, fine, you can call me, if like Barack Obama was like, oh, Chappell, I'd be like, that is my name now.
Right.
But yeah, but Chappell, that's the name. And sometimes chaps, all those nicknames.
Was that, what about like growing up? And like teachers pronouncing it wrong, were you able to correct them?
So,
I loved not having the name is pronounced exactly how it's spelled.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing classmates who'd have very long last names and teachers not being able to do it. And I was always so afraid that one day a teacher wouldn't be able to spell my name or like say my name and I'd have to correct them and I'd be afraid that I wouldn't because I was so nervous as a kid.
Yeah, as a kid, there's so much fear. So actually, Chappell is technically my middle name. So when I was very young, I went by my first name, which was Amanda.
Oh, easy name.
Is Amanda. Still is. So, and I stopped going by that name because I don't know what was in the water in Texas in the 80s, but I had so many classmates named Amanda.
Yeah.
And so
I was going to say.
Yeah. And so
I saw where this was going.
Slowly, it kind of started to go towards the middle name. And my family called me by that for a long time. And so some people who know me when I was like really young,
still call you
5 or 6,
Amanda.
will say Amanda. And I'll still turn when I hear that name. But for 2 decades now, I'm Chappell, I'm pretty attuned to that being what you call me.
I mean, it is now that you say that, I love it as a first name, but it's like a great middle name. It is like a really good middle name.
It's a great middle name, and sometimes I kind of regret it because I feel like Amanda is the unlived me, and maybe Amanda is like my, parallel life living some other journey. And maybe I'll become her again someday.
We can hope.
Yeah, the second life.
We can hope that Amanda will come back.
I reclaim it. But I'm fine with it. And most people who know me, they're like, I can't imagine you any other way. Which is what anyone would say to you.
Right.
Who's only known you one way.
Right.
So I'm good with it, and it's very recognizable and incredibly gender neutral, which I find has been interesting because a lot of people met me and expected to meet a man.
Just from like Twitter, or like just like
no. Now it's different because you can Google and look up anyone. But when the internet wasn't so much the internet, a lot of people thought I was a man, and I think I want to attribute it to Dave Chappell.
Right. Oh,
and it just kind of seeded in their brains that they saw my name, like a teacher or someone would see my name on a roster and meet me and be like, oh. And it was always funny. I was like, what? Am I surprised?
I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and still if I submitted a resume to a job or something, it's not totally clear immediately.
Right.
Of course you can look it up, and I'm out there on the internet.
Yeah.
And at least I present quite female on the internet, so you would probably assume that's my identity. But I kind of that has been interesting.
Yeah. So let's just stay in your childhood into art thing. Like where did design come in? You said you grew up in Texas.
Yeah, I grew up in Texas.
Like how did you? I'm always interested in. I'm going to just rephrase the question to make it more specific, I think. I'm always interested in where the word design came into people's lives. Because I grew up in the suburbs and like had never met a designer before, but I still like stumbled across that profession fairly early in my life. And so what was that like for you?
So I was definitely an art kid. Art and English, and I use the word they, adults, the society makes you feel as if you can be one thing and not another. So of course I grew up thinking I was terrible at math, which is just silly and a lie. But I was, for all cases, an art kid, pretty much an indoor kid. Loved video games, loved coloring, loved Legos, standard stuff. I was very, very lucky, one might even say privileged, to grow up in a family that did really value art and education. And so my parents made sure I went to museums, made sure if I wanted coloring books, they made sure I had some colors. So I was very, very fortunate in that way. My mom is a costume designer.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know if I even thought about those words, but my mom created costumes in her sewing room and for local theater, and I would watch her kind of pattern them out and see these pieces come together to form a whole. So that's probably maybe my earliest memory of something that I would identify as design, but it still did not click with me. I was still, I'm gonna be an art major, I'm gonna be a painter, whatever. That was what was in my head.
As a kid, you were kind of like seeing your mom do this stuff, but you had ambitions as a kid to be an artist or to be in the arts even. It wasn't like, okay.
I knew I would be in the arts, but what's really interesting is you look back at what else you were exposed to. I hate that word, exposed. It's like only for diseases. When you think back to what you saw as a kid growing up, another incredible moment of privilege is I happened to be at a school that had a Macintosh computer lab in 1990. That's a really big deal, especially in growing up in Texarkana, Texas. It was literally such a big deal then that I remember a crew from NBC Nightly News came to film our class because it was not a common thing.
Right.
This was long before Apple started marketing towards schools. Yeah. So it was like Mac, to LCs, classics, stuff like that. And we had this teacher, Miss Miller, who was incredible. And she was having us do things that I'm now understanding affected me and are the reasons I'm here today and in my career. Like, when we were all, it was 5th grade, that means you're like 11, right? Yeah. She put us all, my computer class, there's like 25 of us. She put us all into teams. There were about 5 teams. She had us name our teams and basically create software companies. Yeah. And so We named our team. We had a software company name. You had to identify who was the coder, who was the designer, who did the marketing. And then someone coded it. It was coded on Logo Writer at the time. And
This is
which
amazing.
I didn't realize was code. I just thought it was a cool art program. It was code.
Yeah.
So you're coding this little turtle as this Logo Writer. For the kids who don't know Logo Writer, it's like you code this turtle to tell it what lines to draw, and you would create pictures essentially through coding. And so we would code a game. The coder would create it. The designer was the one who created sort of the elements that you would code. And then the marketer was the person who had to take, they weren't floppy disks by then, they were hard disks, whatever you called them. We had to sell these disks for 50 cents at recess.
This is amazing.
It's amazing. And so I've like subsequently written letters and talked to Miss Miller, who still lives in my family's neighborhood.
I love this.
And I'm like, and this is also a woman running an Apple classroom in the 90s. She just did it and she had us using HyperCard, which is like, I was using HyperCard when I was like 7, 8 years old. That's the beginning of web pages.
Yeah.
And here I was still thinking, I'm an art kid. When that stuff, I thought it was art.
Right.
But it was the beginning of like development. Now in high school, I had to take computer in high school. They literally teach you to type.
Right. Yeah. We had that too.
Which was, I tried to test out of it because I'd been lucky enough to have this one experience. Yeah. And because of that, I became so like also Mac literate at a young age. And so at like age 8 or 9, all the people in my parents' neighborhood who were able to even afford an Apple, whenever they were having trouble with it, they would call me.
Right.
And so here comes this little 8-year-old to show you where the system preferences are. It was a really, really fascinating experience. And but it's still really funny to think about. Out of all of that, no one said to me, nor did I have the thought that this is a job. Like, this is a thing you can do.
Right.
And I was already so into video games. I was already so into computers. But I just was like, oh, I'm an art kid.
Yeah.
And I didn't even think for a second that designing, like, video games or designing computer software was a career that I could be in. And it wasn't because, like, I wasn't exposed to it. It's just, like, logically no one had put those words in front of me.
Right.
Even though I had all the opportunity, probably.
So when did that happen? Or how did that... When did you realize that this was a job, or that, because you studied design, right?
I did. I did eventually make it to design school.
So how'd that happen?
So, I'm going to tell you a story that I don't know if it was a dream or if it happened.
Okay.
I've assumed now that it is a real memory. So... I
think this is the first time anyone's ever told a story like this on the podcast. I'm excited.
I'm just going to be really honest. And I'm not even that old to be already forgetting what's real and what's not, but... I don't know. I live a lot of life. I live a lot. So when I was about 15, I went to Disneyworld with just my mom. We do like random trips together sometimes where we go to places that we know no one else in our family wants to go. And Disneyworld is...
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah, Disneyworld is one of those places. Like Vegas might be another, for a number of reasons. So anyways, we went to Disney World together when I was about 15. It was probably a spring break for me. And I remember walking around, it wasn't even a park. It was like one of those, Disney has all those like, kind of like boardwalky places where it's like... Like
downtown Disney.
Yeah, like downtown Disney. Come to the comedy club. And it's just like the most non-offensive comedy you've ever seen. And I remember walking and I saw this palm tree as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a palm tree, it was a light fixture. And I looked up at it, and I thought it was so cool. And I said to my mom...
How old were you at this time?
Like 15.
Okay.
And I said to my mom, where do you even get something like that? I want something like that. And my mom says, oh, you have to design that. Someone designed that. And then I was like, I'm in the tank.
Yeah.
And that was when it started to go from thinking about art to thinking more about design and what that means.
I can't tell if this is a better story if it's real or if it was a dream. Like, I actually kind of
Exactly.
it almost feels kind of like a letdown as a dream that I want it to be real.
It's one of those things where I've been to Disneyworld kind of like enough times.
And you've never seen the tree again?
And I never saw the tree again. But I've been enough times that there are like lots of little memories that they all swirl together. Yeah. And my brain's a bit of a soup. And I think probably because the internet has broken my brain. So I do believe it actually happened for, the listeners out there. Trust me. Now I'm an unreliable narrator. This is terrible.
No, I hope what happens is that a bunch of people like tweet you pictures of this tree that's like, it's real. We saw it too.
It's there.
We have this tree also.
I would also say around that time, my mom, again, I have super great, amazing parents who were just like cared about me finding something I cared about.
Yeah.
And so she took me to take one of those tests that's like an aptitude test.
Oh, yeah.
And when you finish, you get a list of like, here are all the jobs you could possibly do.
I did one of these too.
Right. And so I think this was a thing. A lot of like boomers especially had their kids do it. So, and I remember those tests are interesting. So there's like a writing portion, and then there's like a weird 3D portion where you have to imagine what a flattened box looks like if you folded it, but you can only like use your brain to think about what it looks like dimensionally. There are all these, and there's multiple choice.
Yeah.
It's an interesting test. And so afterwards, I got this huge list, and it was so funny because it was like architect, lighting designer, engineer.
Yeah. We were the same.
All designer. But the last one on the list was gynecologist.
Okay, plot twist.
And I was like, this is set up for a great joke or something. And I was just like, what did I answer that made everything literally, it was like 100 different design jobs and then gynecologist. And now I'm curious, like, are there any like designers turned gynecologists? What are the skill sets that mix those two? And maybe that's my unlived life. That's what
Amanda would
That's
say.
what Amanda is doing right now.
Right. That's better than my aptitude test, because I had an outlier that now doesn't seem like an outlier. Because my first one was architect, and then I think graphic design was number 2.
Wow.
And then they were all design related. And then it was landscape designer. Mm-hmm. But then I think it was the 4th one, which seemed so random to me at the time, was shoe designer.
Interesting.
I thought that was such a specific...
Well, that's what's really... And this is what's really funny about all this, is like, I have a friend who's she's been a 3rd grade teacher for a very long time now. And, now the thing is, all the kids in her class, they, used to want to be president. Unfortunately, that's not as an exciting of an opportunity for some people. But now all the kids want to be NBA stars. Or YouTubers. YouTubers is another big one. But they mostly want to be NBA stars. And it's so interesting to think about how, like, she had a shoe designer come in and present to the class. And they seemed kind of baffled and not really interested. And she was like, hey, this is the person who he makes Air Jordans.
Right.
That's the kind of thing they do. And it blew the kids' minds. So it's basically like the kids needed a use case.
Yeah.
To fathom this. And I often think about that, like, even just like staring at a box of cereal as a kid, you were not thinking, someone had to make this.
Right.
And it's a real job. And kids still don't.
Yeah. So when you got into design school and you started studying design, what was that like? Like, were you, did you have things you were interested in designing at the time? Did you like it? What was that?
Oh.
I don't mean to this whole conversation won't be like your early childhood and college, I promise, but.
Yeah, now that we've set up that everything's just a dream. No, so I did actually.
This episode's never coming out, by the way.
It's a dream episode.
Yeah.
It's like in the TV shows where they have that one episode where it's just a dream.
Mm-hmm.
So I did get into a design program, but the way my program was set up, it was at the University of Texas at Austin. And the way it was set up is that you had to do 1 year of foundational courses, which were essentially art courses.
Yeah, that's how my school was.
Very, it's a very basic thing to do. You're mixed in with the art kids. It's actually really important, I think, to start to understand and ask yourself questions about what is art and design.
Yeah.
Those are questions you will probably never solve. At least if you're smart, you know that you will never solve them. But you start to diverge a little and figure out where your differences are. So what you have to do at my program is you go through the foundations for a year and then you have to apply for a design program.
Okay.
I did not get in my first application. I was totally gutted. I was totally wrecked. I was a very sensitive child. I still am very sensitive. And I remember crying in my dorm closet. I don't know why, but I was in my dorm closet crying. So I was like, what am I going to do now? It just seems like the end of the line, which is very silly.
Yeah.
Because you're all of 18 years old.
Right.
And so I said, well, I'm just going to take another year of art classes, and I'm going to apply again after that. And I did. And that was probably the best decision I made, because you're a way better person.
Yeah.
After a year of doing things.
Yeah.
And I took classes that were really important to me. Like, I took lithography, which is a printmaking class where you draw on limestone, and print from that. And lithography appeals, the design students really took to lithography well because it's so, chemical based, and there's all these processes that really spoke to me. And I get it now because it is that process that appeals, I think, to a design sensibility. I took metalworking.
Nice. Which
was funny. My metalworking teacher said all my favorite students are the design students because they know what it means to sit and really think of a concept.
Right.
Whereas an art student is kind of improvising. And in metalworking, that's actually dangerous.
Yeah, that's very dangerous.
And I could sketch out my whole thing and bring it to her, and she would already know where I could have trouble.
Yeah.
So that year was really important. And then I applied, and of course by then I'd also become a stronger communicator. And you had to apply with an essay. So I had an essay. Okay. And I'd also identified I was really, at that point, really interested in lighting design.
Okay.
And so I was pretty sure that was kind of the road for me. And that probably comes a little bit from the theater background of my mom as a costume designer.
Yeah. So I don't want to just skip over, a bunch of your life.
Really important stuff. Much stuff.
I think when we first started following each other on Twitter, I guess you had probably just finished at SVA, or maybe had been out for a year or so. So how much time was between undergrad and then going back to school, and what prompted that, or why did you want to do that?
Definitely this was my great awakening. It was only for me about a year between undergrad and grad.
Okay.
I can't recommend that for everyone. Some people I would say, yes, keep working. Some I would say go immediately. Everyone's different. So what happened for me is in my last year of design school, I had that really wonderful moment where I realized I did not want to be a practicing designer, which is super cool to discover.
Right, your last year.
Last year.
What was that? What was that moment, or what was it about it that you...
I honestly don't, I can't pinpoint a moment. Part of it was just immaturity and frustration in the classroom. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to handle that space and to be judged on what I was making.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I wasn't there. So part of it could have been me running away for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
But I just stopped thinking about it as my biggest, greatest love. Design is a great love for me. But what happened is I had to stay an extra semester at college because we live in this super cool country with an amazing healthcare system that made it so that I needed to stay on my parents' insurance because I needed a major surgery. And the only way to stay on their insurance was to stay a student at the time.
Okay.
Greatest country. So it was cheaper, literally cheaper for me to take an extra semester of school than like to try to get my own insurance. So
that's crazy.
It's wild. So that's what I did. And it was, again, one of the best things that happened to me. And that's because I started, since I was there an extra semester, I had maybe just 2 more classes left I had to take, but then I needed 2 more. So I just piled up my schedule with writing classes. And I wasn't sure why I did that, but I saw there's this one class called Postmodern America. It was taught by this guy named Jeffrey Meikle, who is still at the University of Texas, has written some great books about design. But he was hidden away in what was called the American Studies department.
That's interesting.
So I took this class, and it was this total soup of architecture, literature, and design that's considered postmodern. And we would write about it. And
it's amazing.
It was the best. Like, it was, I just realized this is it. This is the best class I've ever taken. It beat every design studio course. We were talking about, we'd read a Thomas Pynchon novel, and then we would be talking about, ducks and sheds and Venturi. Yeah. All at the same time.
And you're like 22, probably?
Yeah, I was 22, and most of these people in the class just needed a writing credit. They aren't from a design program.
Yeah.
And so it was clearly not resonating with people the same way. I was like the nerd showing up and like asking the teacher 1,000 questions. Total, I'm sure, annoying student. I took that, and at the same time I took another writing class called The Disneyfication of America.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was, all the reading material was about Walt Disney and Disneyworld, and it was just really about the productizing of an empire. So these 2 things together, I was just writing so much for these classes, and I started freaking out because it was like, what does this mean? I love design, I really do, but I don't want to do that thing. I'm loving this thing. And I had this design mentor at the time. His name's Riley Triggs. He was he's an architect who taught some design studios. And so he was kind of a mentor for me at the time. And so I went to his office, and I remember sitting down and saying to him, like, Riley, I don't know what to do because I love this writing thing, but I love design. And I will never forget, he just stopped me and said, Chappell, writing is design. And that changed my life.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It blew my mind open. And then he said the next gift to me, which is, I heard about this program in New York.
Yeah.
It's partially co-founded by this new teacher we have here. You should talk to him. And so I did, and here I am. And that was it. That was basically, we're so indebted to mentors and people who give us, I feel like I've had so many gifts given to us, my teacher Riley or my computer teacher Miss Miller. It's just, those are such gifts. And so I looked up this new program called Design Criticism at the School of Visual Arts in New York. It was the first year. And so, your parents love that when you're like, hey, so I'm thinking not only of doing more school, but it's a totally untested program with a very esoteric name, and I can't tell you what...
In New York City.
In New York City, and I can't tell you what job I will possibly get from that. But my parents knew enough about me to know that if I was bringing this to them, I cared, and this was it for me.
So I've talked to a decent amount of people from the program. I talked to Alice, I talked to Molly,
Bryn,
and Keto. And so I've talked about the program a lot, but I'm kind of curious what your experience was like. What did you learn there? Did it feel like a continuation of kind of, this kind of awakening that you had?
Absolutely. It just felt right.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I did apply, so I applied for 2 grad schools.
Okay.
I applied for this design criticism program at SVA. I also applied to cinema studies at the University of Southern California because there's this other part of me that really wanted to write and study animation history and theory and all that. And I visited both schools, and it was just it was so clear, and I feel thankful that it wasn't a tough decision to make, because I visited USC, and it was film nerds who were just like, yes, my awakening was the 1923 silent Russian import, and I was like, oh my god, this is not for me. I couldn't even find a way to even understand how I would be there. I couldn't envision myself there. And also, I never thought of myself as a West Coast person. Though maybe now, I'm maybe getting to that point. So, yeah, and then I went to visit SVA, and I was like, oh, this is it. These are my people.
Did you have I guess this came in the postmodern class, in the Disney class, but what was your relationship to the words criticism or theory? That kind of why did that seem interesting to you?
I wasn't yet as concerned about the criticism word, that word, as I was about writing.
Okay.
And I knew that writing meant thinking critically. And so cool, I'll take that word, criticism. And then I grew into it. So it really wasn't about it to start.
Okay.
And then it became more of an interest to me later.
How did that happen? What kind of classes was the program at the time that you kind of grew into that?
Well, most of the program was about observing and thinking critically. It was not about criticism the traditional sense of getting in the studio with a pin-up board.
Right.
And in fact, I think that's one of the missing elements of the program is actually practicing going and sitting with working designers and helping each other with your crafts. And that's something I would love more of. I've always had some pipe dream of a criticism mentor program where designers and artists could kind of adopt someone who would be their sounding board.
Oh, critic. Interesting. Yeah.
Or they're it's almost, honestly, you, as a critic, you're often playing the role of therapist. So it's a little bit of that too. And in a way, I think that'd be great for everyone, because I think more people who create things need to learn to feel empowered in the criticism space and not scared of that person. And critics also need to learn more about the fact that these are real people making things.
Right.
And they have problems. They have life experiences. They have debt. They have challenges that are leading them to make the choices they are.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be gained.
Can you talk more about kind of, I don't want to say necessarily the role of criticism, but you've written a decent amount about kind of what criticism means and what it means to be a critic and kind of the place for criticism. And could you just kind of talk about how you arrived at
Mm-hmm.
kind of the way you see the role of the critic or the role of criticism?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about this.
We have time.
and I totally feel that no one needs to agree with me, though I feel that my way is my truth.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm sorry to now just start answering the question that I asked you.
Yeah.
But to me, that this is something I've been thinking about the last, I don't know, month or so, that like the biggest change, in my opinion, the biggest change makes it sound probably bigger than it might not be. A big change in the way I've thought about this is that when I was younger, it was like a narrow lens that criticism had to be this one way, and then the other ways were wrong, and that people who didn't see it this way were wrong, and I was somehow right. And I know I'm speaking like very abstractly, but it's like just an opening or an expanse that there are a lot of different ways of doing it. So anyway, to agree with you that
it's
that this is not gospel.
It's not black or white for sure.
Yeah.
I think most of us grew up thinking criticism was like Siskel and Ebert, thumbs up, thumbs down, review in the paper. Is it 5 stars, 3 stars? And, for the sake of marketing and quick reading, sure, that is a subset of criticism, and I think it has its place. But as you get older, like if you really care about work and what people are doing, criticism is not about judgment, and it's not about good or bad.
Right.
There's no such thing really in my mind as good or bad.
Yeah.
In almost any regard, when it comes to creative work or creating something.
Mm-hmm.
And what really changed my outlook, I started looking into other areas where that employ criticism that might even be more adept than design. Because design is pretty...
Which is most of the other fields that employ criticism.
Is most. All the fields that do are pretty young, except for art. Art criticism has been around a while, because art has been around forever. Mm-hmm. Design as an industry, film as an industry are they're babies. But what really, really kind of expanded my view was by really studying theater.
Okay.
And how criticism works in that space. And I would love to see design and even art to some sense adopt their kind of methodologies, or a few of them. Because art and design is still stuck in this world of a very top-down, the guy walks into the room, he's the critic, and it's his way, and it's not penned up correctly. And, though I think you do need discipline, and you do need to learn respect for the space you're in, it's this real, like, kind of scare tactic thing.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, maybe it can work. I've had some really scary teachers, and it did teach me to sit up a little straighter and be a little more, thoughtful or whatever. But in the end, I don't think people respond too well to it. And so what's interesting about theater is that it's an older art form, and they have so many processes that help with, being critical in the space with the creator, that are so respectful and helpful. Mm. And I found them just so exciting. And it was, I knew, like, I need to adopt this. When I'm fortunate enough to get to go into a studio and be a critic, this is what I want to do. And so now I believe that my responsibility, if I'm a quote-unquote critic in a studio, my responsibility is to come in and help students just figure out how to move forward with their work. It's not about telling them what is good or what is bad. That's what students think they want to hear, and they're scared and terrified. Mm-hmm. I also make it my responsibility to set up the situation and design it so that I don't have more power than them.
Yeah.
So it's important for them to understand that I'm there to be literally like, I am a Sherpa who guides you,
Yeah.
but I'm here to learn pretty much the same way you are. So I do that by setting it up, and there are all these techniques. The most popular one is like the Liz Lerman technique, who's like this amazing theater choreography person. And she has these kind of techniques for setting up the criticism space. And so one of the major ways is to remind the author or the creator of the work that they're in control of this situation.
Yeah.
And they can ask questions of us, and we can ask questions of them, but they don't have to answer. And so I say that to all the students I deal with. I'm going to ask you this question. You can think about it, or you can think about it and answer it. It's up to you.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important to me to empower students immediately, like in that space, because that's what it's about. You should leave feeling better than when I walked in the door. And if you don't, I don't feel like I've done my job. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And so, and I do think there's that aspect, but the older I've gotten now, my secondary job as a critic is that I want to make sure that each student makes the thing that only they can make.
Right.
Right. So like Jarrett is only going to make the podcast that he can make, or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a harder thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think that's really important because I need to remove my own selfishness and ego of what I'm thinking they should do.
Right. This is like the worst type of question that an interviewer can ask somebody, because I'm basically just going to ask you to keep talking about what you're already talking about. Mm-hmm. But there were I think there's two things interesting there that I would love if you have more to say about, if you could. And one is kind of the critical perspective being one of generosity, like first and foremost, I think is really interesting. And then also this idea of power, I think is really interesting. And both of those, I think, get twisted a lot. Whether that's like whether it's kind of someone writing about someone's work in, a magazine or a website, or even in the classroom, there's a certain, whether it's students who, see me as the professor, as somehow my opinion is worth more than someone else's, and kind of wanting that right and wrong. And I think that comes back to both generosity and the kind of like the power there. So do you have any more to say about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think for what it's worth, a teacher and a critic, their opinions are valuable. And in their experience is valuable, and they've had more years than the students, and that it should be acknowledged. But insofar as me standing up and telling you I think your work is good or bad,
right? Yeah.
It's kind of silly. I mean, perhaps it's gonna scratch an itch for you if I'm like, this is so good, your work is so good, But what does that matter? How does that help you make better things or things that you care about? And so it's maybe I'm an annoying critic because what I do is I just ask loads of questions. Yeah. That's what I do. I want to ask questions to help designers think about why they did something, and to maybe inspire them to go on a new route that they hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
Or to help them refine what's already there. But, I was talking with my friend Scott Stoll about this. We talk about it all the time, about kind of the jaded critic. And I remember seeing Twitter is the worst because everyone there is jaded. But I remember seeing some technology writer ahead of, one of the big Apple press days, whatever they call them. And he was just like, it was like the day before, and he was already like dumping on Apple, just be like, oh, what's Johnny Ive gonna do this time? Like super sarcastic. And I mean, I was just looking at this, and when I was talking to my friend Scott, we were saying, like, why wouldn't you want Apple to make the best thing they've ever made?
Right.
And if you don't want that, I'm really worried about why you're in this job. Because what that says to me is you're in this job to look cool and to have your opinions validated. And that sucks.
Yeah.
It only works for you.
Yeah.
It's not actually going to help things get better. And you know what? That's not everyone's job. And not everyone is out there to make things get better. That's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
But if you are literally employed to write thoughtfully about the things this world is producing, shouldn't you be open?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you should.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're exactly right. And I want to try to... I have like 30 questions based on that I could ask you. I want to try to connect what we were just talking about to something else, because I'm thinking, we mostly have been talking about this kind of in a classroom setting. I feel like since I started teaching, I've learned a lot about what it means to be a critic, and working with students in all of the ways that you're talking about. But then to like talk about this technology critic, I think, I don't mean to oversimplify this, but a lot of the way we're talking about it is to kind of help the maker. What about like the inverse of, a technology writer, for example, is most of the people who will read that person, whether it's on Twitter or whatever they end up writing, aren't the people that made the thing. Totally. And so how does criticism serve, whether it's like the user, I guess, or the reader or the viewer? Do those ideas translate the other way?
Yeah, I think there's a whole other conversation, which I shouldn't gloss over, about the pressure of people who write publicly, journalists, writers, whatever, the pressure they feel to have a personality and to do a bit of tap dancing online to get eyeballs on their work.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't want to totally diss that or whatever. I mean, who am I to talk? I have the most irreverent online personality. So there is some pressure there, I think, to kind of be retweetable, etc.
Yeah.
So I don't want to totally sideline that, but I do think, well, obviously there's the very basics of what these types of writers can do, and that's like, well, they're helping people determine whether they should purchase something or not, which is, it's helpful in some ways. Like, I use Wirecutter constantly.
Yeah.
Every time I, like, little things. I needed to buy a water bottle the other day, and I was like, you know what? I bet Wirecutter has great write-ups on water bottles, and they did. And it was incredibly helpful and very practical. So there's that side of thing, which I do feel is a sort of critical approach. The most old school Consumer Report style.
Right.
But beyond that, I think every critic has they feel they have a different responsibility. So when you're writing publicly, it depends who you're writing about. But if you're writing about a giant company and all you want to do is write about the latest app update, that's okay. Is it good or bad? Okay. But where it gets interesting is when you can start to write about what these companies are doing to the world.
Yeah.
And so that's what's interesting, and especially in my own career, I'm much less focused on the design of things, like phones, logos. I don't, like, my opinion on that is like, whatever, I can give you 2 lines.
Yeah, same.
But I think where it gets interesting is the design of systems that produce things.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that across the board. And that's what's really exciting. and I think of how online writing has changed a lot. And there's a whole redux that needs to be done about where online writing was in 2008 in this optimistic Obama era versus now, especially in the design industry.
Yeah.
And it really was focused on objects back then.
Yeah.
And there are all those object books coming out, like the 100
right,
objects
right,
of
right.
New York and stuff like
yeah.
that. And now you literally have design writers being like, here's why voting booths suck. And it's because of these like 5 regulations going on. Like, this is incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's where I, of course, want to see writing go.
Right.
Because that's interesting and that promotes true change. Not to say I don't want to ignore objects. Objects are beautiful and lovely, and let's talk about them too. But that has been an incredible arc to witness.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's kind of like where I started, is like I wanted the thing that we have now, and I felt like no one was talking about that. But I almost over-indexed on that other side, that I was like, the object doesn't matter. The design of this, the way this thing looks doesn't matter. And what I've come to realize is how connected those are, and that this is an obvious thing to say. The way a thing looks is driven by these systems. So if we can just kind of dig deeper on the systems, then maybe that would make that other discussion more interesting.
Right. The final product, or whatever you want to call it, the design, it's just evidence of a bigger system.
Right.
And a bigger kind of congregation of people. And I've realized that in the last few years, especially working in agencies, it's like, what does it matter what I think of a branding system? I can think it's successful in that as a user, it's like an accessible design and I can read it and it helps me do what I need to do. Mm-hmm. Great. But, we have all these blogs and things dedicated to like the thumbs up or thumbs down on that stuff. And I'm like, this is great. But this is ignoring many other topics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also sidelining why we as an industry are propping up certain trends, who we're leaving out by propping up trends, why these trends come to the surface, why kids who came from SVA and Pratt and Parsons with 40, 50K in debt are continuing these trends and doing it because they really feel that pressure with their finances and their life. And there's so much going on behind every branding system that, like, the end result is just the period on the sentence.
Right.
I'm just like, cool, you did the thing. How did you do that thing? That's what's interesting. And the story is about the people involved, what made them who they are, and then the way they work together. That's interesting.
Right.
That's storytelling. That actually has an arc, but the design work, the evidence, it's there.
Yeah.
And again, I shouldn't totally demote the work of the people in this industry that I love so much, because the design is still very important and it's still my like home and love of an industry, but it's just this little tiny part.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I could talk to you about that for another hour. You mentioned Twitter, and you mentioned the kind of like positioning and branding of that, and I don't have like too many questions about this, but you're so active on Twitter, and it seems like you are, and I'm curious how that has kind of. I'm not saying that as a negative thing, by the way.
I feel so judged.
But like, how does that kind of communication and a consumption influence how you think about these things? Or has it
certainly changed. It's an ever-evolving thing. I think when people meet me who've only ever known me online, they're actually surprised sometimes that I'm quite serious in person. Like, I'm serious about work.
Right.
And how we can all work together to make things. And online, that's my space to be a bit more irreverent. and to just talk about things I care about.
Yeah.
And I used to just really care so much about like design thought leadership, TED Talks, design quotes, tweet a design quote, retweet this person, retweet, and it just kind of seems silly and pointless.
Yeah.
And not to say, again, we were in it back then when Twitter like felt like it was really new. We were like in it, and it was exciting to be able to connect with people that we otherwise wouldn't. And now it's so different.
Yeah.
All the people I know who used to tweet so seriously now are like, well, I got out of bed today and I'm surviving, send tweet, and that's like it.
Yeah.
And everyone's being kind of weirdly earnest in a way that I love, despite a lot of terrible news that you also have to read through. But I have started to, the past 2 years for me has been about meeting people in real life from Twitter that I've always followed. And I've just been meeting such amazing people. And it feels like we have truly actually been friends for a long time. And we have. Like, you and I are having a conversation pretty easily.
Yeah.
And we've never met before today. But we've known each other.
Yeah.
And I think there's something that it did. It made connections a little easier in person, whereas in the past, like through chats and instant messenger and stuff, it always felt awkward and weird.
Right.
People feel accessible in a way that I think is pretty great. I don't think that Twitter is healthy at all. And sometimes when I find my brain starts thinking in tweets, it's not good for me, and that's why I have to practice my writing, my long-form writing, to make sure I'm not condensing my thoughts into...
That's what I was going to ask. Is, like, has it changed how you think about writing?
In a lot of ways, it's been incredibly helpful because I'm someone who wanted to learn to be more succinct. I'm a rambly person, typically. I've gotten better. Working in agencies has helped me because most of what I do is I write decks, and I have to learn to be very pithy and really condense thoughts. And some people would hate that being the product of working on an agency, but I truly have loved it.
Yeah.
And so, Twitter has helped me condense my thoughts a lot. And it's also helped me to I'm just public about what I care about. And I don't feel embarrassed. I don't feel like there's, what's the word, guilty pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that word doesn't, that doesn't resonate for me because I'm like, no, you like it. It's pleasure. Come on. And so people who follow me know that I tweet about very random things, but it's like, it's me.
Right.
So it's like, oh, Chappell's tweeting about Tron again. Oh, Chappell's tweeting about this weird bootleg Nintendo system again. And then I'm also tweeting about, like, my favorite rom-coms. So, like, I have, like, my area I live in, and it actually starts to feel like my own brand, which is so dumb to talk about it that way, but it does. And I created that roundup that I send out every week. And the roundup is just, like, 9 things that I found on the internet that week that I love. And I'm just going to share it with you. And here you go, internet. And it has surprisingly built up a small following, but a very dedicated one. And everyone just really, like, appreciates it in a way that I totally did not expect. And I've just learned that, like, I don't worry about, like, am I curating things that are designy or the right things? I'm just like, what's the stuff I like? I'm putting it in. And, of course, every now and then I have a tweet about how I'm afraid everything's, a garbage fire. And I want to try to be more optimistic and not so, like, performative, which I think is the issue with Twitter, is it's performative outrage, and I'm afraid that for some people that feels like a legitimate thing to do when it's like, yes, it's fine, but, like, what else are you doing to make you feel better?
Yeah.
It's often something, when it's awful in my life, I find ways to I recommend giving your password to a loved one when you want to stay off Twitter. It sounds terrible. It sounds a bit like an addict. I don't have a problem as much with Twitter anymore, but I used to have a period where I was checking it a lot. And so I decided to like reset my password. Or no, I decided to let a loved one reset my password and told them, don't let me in until I ask you. And I would take a week off.
Yeah.
And that was just a safeguard. And now I can sign out for days at a time, and it's like I don't think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I downloaded one of those stupid apps that like blocks websites.
Oh yeah, I block
couple
websites
months ago, and it felt so weird to do that, but it does help.
It does help, and especially if you are in this business of, if you're in any business of creating work, which requires in-depth focus, these things are bad for you.
Yeah.
They are, it's equivalent to what junk food is to food.
Yeah.
It's not like, you shouldn't be ashamed that you want it. Like we all want like chips, but it a little goes a long way, and it takes you away from being able to dive deeper. And that is when I notice it's a problem, is when I'm incapable of diving deeper into my own writing and my own process.
Right.
And that's when I have to be like, whoa, you got to get out of that world for a bit.
Speaking of your own writing and your own process, what are you thinking about right now? Like, what are the things on your mind that you're interested in?
I'm interested in, I haven't been doing a lot.
Aside from Tron and bootleg video games.
My problem has always been that I care about too many things. I like too many things.
Yeah.
And in fact, my friend, Scott Stoll, he gave me this bumper sticker. He bought it while he was at a Yale art fair. And it just says, I love everything. And it's...
We're so similar. This is so bad.
It's so like, it so encapsulates like how I feel. I truly do love so many things that is where actually I spend a lot of my time, is determining my next thing to work on.
Yeah.
And so I've actually taken a ton of time away from writing about design and writing design essays, because I think that if you are, this is guidance I give to all my students, if you're lucky enough to find a thing you care about, for me that's writing, for everyone could be something else, you should come at it from every angle. So I've worked as a journalist, I've worked as an editor, I've written short essays, long essays, profiles, bios. I'm trying all the formats. And I recently stepped away to try playwriting.
Oh, nice.
And I recommend it for literally anyone in the design industry. Yeah. Because especially if you are in a job where you have to develop user journeys and personas and user stories, this is actually pretty common in a lot of jobs now that you do have to do this. Playwriting teaches you how to do that. It also teaches you many things about criticism, which we've discussed, because that space is so much more mature in criticism. And it kind of teaches you to develop a new type of distance to talk about things you care about. I mean, the first play I wrote, which is never going to see the light of day because it's your first horrible draft that you have to get out so you can write better things. It was about an architect. And it was literally about all the frustrations I was feeling towards the architecture industry and that world and kind of lionization. And it felt so good to write. Yeah. And a lot of the characters were inspired by people in the design world. And it's super cathartic. Like, honestly, cheaper than therapy. And, there is for, like, people who actually are interested in New York City, if you're here in this lovely city, there are actually lots of resources. And there's this great place called the Einhorn School of Performing Arts. And they offer affordable classes in playwriting.
Nice.
And it's like sliding scale. You can be like, I can only pay $50 this week, because somewhere like...
that's so interesting.
Yeah, somewhere like NYU, continuing ed course could be a couple $1,000s. Yeah, and I can't, we can't, come on, let's be real here. We're, I don't even know if this is a serious pursuit yet for me. So this place is amazing, and they just have great teachers who are working in the field right now. There are lots of writing exercises online. And so for people who really want to get into things, I often tell them, try to get 5 minutes of your day, usually in the morning. Find online, you can Google writing prompts.
Yeah.
And then sit down and set a timer and just each day try a writing prompt for 5 minutes. You will be shocked at the stuff that comes out of your brain.
Yeah.
You have so much in there, and designers have incredible ways of thinking that they don't even fully understand.
Yeah.
And there will be stuff that comes out of you that you are just like, what? What is this? I think it's great. But that said, writing is scary, and it's not for everyone. And so, like I caution people, like, it's okay if you don't want to write. Like, I do think we've kind of overdone it with everyone being like, all designers should write. I'm like, yeah, it is really great if you can, but, like, that is not everyone's, like, natural place to live in. And I do think designers need to learn to communicate, but everyone's language is different. Yeah. And you might communicate better in words, spoken out loud, and some might be...
I mean, not to make this about me.
Okay.
But...
Okay.
Like, this podcast has been so helpful in realizing that, you know, maybe writing isn't my thing. And I've been asked to write for people for things, and I realize that everything I'm thinking about, everything that I'm interested in just comes out in these conversations. And I think I don't think I'm a great, you know, I'm not Terry Gross, but I think I'm a better interviewer than I'm a better writer. Yeah. And, you know, that's hard to admit to myself, thinking that writing was the thing that I wanted to do.
It's being able to even prioritize the list of your skills is incredible. Yeah. One of the best things in the world is being able to cross off something, to be like, nope, not for me. Right. It's great to do. Yeah. I had friends tell me, you should try like an acting or an improv class. You might be good at that. And I tried it, and I'm like, great, I did it, can cross that off. That dream is done. And so it's great to prioritize and to understand where you're like, there's a difference in between like, I'm more comfortable here than not. Right. And there's sometimes where the field is that area is challenging you because it's hard. Yeah. And writing is like the worst. I would recommend to people to not want to do that because it is never easy. It's kind of like, I've heard Olympic swimmers talk about swimming. Every time you swim, it's hard. And I feel that same way about writing. It is so hard and painful, and 90% of it is just you sweating and thinking, what have I done to myself? But that other 10% is the part where you realize how incredible it is, and you have that amazing euphoric feeling of this thing you've done. Yeah. So it is hard, and whenever people keep kind of like the rallying cry of like, all designers must write, it's like, that's easy to say. It's really hard to do, and it's a huge, to use an industry term, it's a huge ask. It's a huge ask. And yes, I work a lot with designers who constantly are having to write. They have to write CTAs or whatever. That's call to action for anyone who doesn't know. The buttons on your phone, perhaps, that you tap. Designers have to write those all the time, and that is kind of scary. Yeah. And fortunately, you can have someone like me come along and help you write those. Yeah. But yeah, I want you to have a working knowledge of language, but writing is hard, and I work with designers all the time to help them write cover letters and resumes, and it is just a slog. And I'm sorry, it's not easier. Yeah. It's not natural. Yeah. Talking is natural.
Right. Yeah, that's right. My last question is a question that I end all of these conversations with. I'm kind of curious. You've done a really good job of mentioning people who were kind of mentors to you, but I'm interested, are there other books, writers, people, authors, teachers, critics who have kind of influenced you, or like all of these things we've talked about that have kind of really shaped how you think about these things?
This question totally sucks because
I know, everyone says that.
The next day I'm going to be like, oh God, here are all these people that I should have mentioned. You know, there are so many people of course in the design field that I had the honor of even knowing. I would say, you know, like Ralph Kaplan comes to mind. because I think his book By Design was so ahead of its time. And I still read things in it to this day that I'm just like, how did he have this foresight? Like how?
Yeah.
And it's not he's not predicting technology. He's just talking about design in a way that was not talked about, and we still are trying to talk about it that way.
Yeah.
And then Akiko Bush was one of my teachers. I found she takes a much more fiction approach to writing about the world and a kind of a narrative approach, and I found that super exciting. But and there's just so many people in the design world who I love. Like we all love Michael Beirut, and I love my friend Scott. Scott Stoll is one of my good friends, and I just love his work and his approach to everything he does. And maybe you should interview him.
Yeah. He's been on my list for a while. I need to make that happen.
He's amazing, and his show will be much better than this one, so you should listen to him. But yeah, I tend to have kind of an array of people that I think are interesting. And, I really love Alexandra Lang. I love her approach and her way of thinking and her just care and concern. I've said it before. I've probably tweeted it, but I'm just deeply attracted to people who care.
Yeah.
And that's what matters to me. And I will see someone pick up a piece of trash they accidentally dropped and throw it in a trash can, and I'm like, let's be friends forever. It's just this deep concern about the world that I absolutely value in people. And so I don't know, to answer that question, of course names aren't even coming to me.
Yeah.
Because they never do.
I think that's such a nice, positive way to end this. Chappell, thank you so much. This was so fun. I'm so glad we finally got to meet in real life.
I too.
Thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
This episode was recorded on August 15th, 2018 in Brooklyn, New York. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.